Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Every May 1st, like clockwork, my parents transformed into these overly affectionate, Pinterest-inspired party planners. Balloons taped to the ceiling, bakery tier cakes arranged like centerpieces, and speeches that sounded like presidential addresses, all for my younger brother Alex. Every single year. And every single year, without fail, my birthday 2 weeks later passed like a leaf blowing down the sidewalk. Noticed only by strangers and maybe my dental reminder email. This time, though, something in me didn't just hurt. It shifted. Quietly, we grew up in a middle-class neighborhood where the houses all looked the same, but people pretended they were different because one had a porch swing and another had a Japanese maple. My parents, Linda and Frank, were the type who believed appearances were everything, and Alex, well, he was the golden boy they polished for everyone to see. The stories always revolved around him. When he got promoted to store manager, they made a Facebook album called Our Alex, Our Pride. When I landed my first national campaign with a major marketing firm, I got a half-interested "good for you, honey" over a distracted phone call while they were on the way to pick up dry cleaning. No Facebook post, no album. This year, Alex's birthday was on a Saturday, and my parents decided to rent a boat. A literal boat. For a guy who once locked himself out of his car and waited 3 hours instead of calling for help. They invited everyone, friends, family, even old neighbors from 2 streets over, who I hadn't seen since the early 2000s. They told me about it 2 weeks in advance, like they wanted me to clear my schedule just to be in the background of Alex's champagne-drenched moment. I said I'd try, but I already knew I wasn't going. On May 1st, my phone buzzed with their photos. My brother grinning beside a 2-tier cake shaped like a yacht, my mom clutching his arm like she'd given birth to royalty, and some cheesy caption about how proud they were of the man he'd become. I didn't react. I didn't even like the post. I just watched from my quiet little apartment, ate leftover Thai food, and told myself I was too old to care. But when my birthday rolled around 14 days later, and I woke up to nothing. No call, no text, no card in the mailbox. I realized it wasn't about the day being forgotten. It was about me being invisible, year after year, intentionally. I gave them until noon, then 2, still nothing. Around 4 o'clock, my mom called. Her voice was casual, too casual. She asked if I'd seen the photos from the boat, and if I thought the cake had looked a little too fondant heavy. I stared at my phone, the muscles in my neck tightening, but I said nothing about the date. I just listened. She never mentioned my birthday, not even a passing, "Oh, we forgot," nothing. Later that evening, I sat alone on my couch with a glass of red wine, half watching some nature documentary. The narrator was describing how wolves exile weaker members of their pack, not out of cruelty, but survival. It hit me then. My family hadn't forgotten me. I wasn't overlooked. I was exiled. The difference is subtle but brutal. When I was 16, I won a statewide art contest, and my school printed a banner with my painting on it. My mom told me she couldn't come to the award ceremony because she had to help Alex get ready for his baseball tryouts. He was 11. That was the first time I really noticed it. The pattern, if I succeeded, it was invisible. If Alex did anything, it was a parade. At 37, I'd gotten used to being the afterthought. I told myself it made me stronger, more independent. But that night, sitting in the dark with the faint blue light of the TV flickering across the wine glass, I didn't feel strong. I felt erased. The next day, my best friend Maria called to ask how the birthday had gone. I lied, told her I had dinner with some coworkers. She didn't buy it, of course. Maria had known me since college, and she was one of those people who could read the truth in your silence. I think she knew I was unraveling, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. "You ever think about just disappearing?" I asked, half laughing but meaning it more than I wanted to. "Only every time I open Instagram," she replied, then paused. "You know, Jen, maybe it's not about them forgetting. Maybe it's about you finally remembering who the hell you are." That stuck with me. I went quiet again after we hung up. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even get angry. I just sat there and stared at a photo of me and Alex from when we were kids, taped to the fridge, both of us grinning, arms around each other, him missing a front tooth. I pulled it off, crumpled it slowly, and tossed it into the trash. That was the moment it clicked. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need to beg for space in their spotlight. I just needed to build my own, and light it so bright they couldn't ignore it, even if they tried. And I already knew exactly how I was going to do it. The Monday after my birthday passed like a ghost in the hallway, unseen and unacknowledged. I woke up and did what I always did. I got dressed, made coffee, answered work emails, and moved through the day as if everything was fine. But there was something about the quiet this time that didn't feel like peace. It felt like suffocation, like standing in a room where someone had turned the oxygen down so slowly I didn't notice until I was already gasping. I didn't call my parents. I didn't send a passive-aggressive text or drop any sarcastic birthday memes in the family group chat, which I noticed had remained suspiciously inactive since my brother's boat bash. I chose silence, not because I was trying to be mature, but because I didn't trust myself to speak without cracking. Maria picked up on it the minute we met for lunch 2 days later at this little taco place near the pier, the kind of place with sticky menus and bad parking but legendary shrimp bowls. She took one look at me as I slid into the booth and said, "Okay, you're wearing your don't mess with me lip color, which means either work is imploding or someone said something stupid to you." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because she wasn't wrong. I told her the truth, laid it all out, the forgotten birthday, the casual call from my mother where she breezed past the date like it meant nothing, and the deep, aching hollow that had taken root in my chest since then. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to comfort me or say the obligatory, "They probably didn't mean it." She just listened, her brows tight, and her fingers absently twisting her straw wrapper into tiny knots. When I was done, she let out a breath and said, "Jesus, Jen, that's not just forgetting, that's erasure." And that word, erasure, it stuck with me like a sliver under the skin. It wasn't the kind of pain that made you scream. It was quieter, constant. The kind of pain you learned to carry so well, you forgot you were bleeding. That night, I stayed up late, scrolling through social media like a masochist. Alex had posted a highlight reel of his birthday weekend, laughing on the boat deck, blowing out candles, opening some ridiculous watch my dad had probably spent half his pension on. The caption read, "Grateful for the best parents and the best day ever." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. But I stared at it long enough to memorize the way my mom's smile stretched so wide it made her eyes crinkle. The same way it used to when I brought home straight A's in elementary school, before Alex started t-ball and stole the family spotlight forever. I closed the app and opened my camera roll, scrolled past the photos of work trips, marketing events, smiling selfies with clients and coworkers who saw my worth even when my family couldn't. And somewhere between the photos from last summer's leadership conference and a shot of me with windblown hair on the cliffs in Big Sur, I started to feel this low, rising heat. Not rage exactly, but a kind of searing awareness that I had spent too long asking for crumbs from people who didn't even notice when they dropped the whole damn cake in someone else's lap. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in for a mental health day, something I never did, and I spent the better part of the afternoon in my apartment, standing in front of the mirror, asking myself a question I'd spent years avoiding. What would it look like if I stopped trying to win their love and just gave that energy back to myself? Maria came by that evening with cheap wine and her old college laptop, which she called her revenge planning device, and we sat on my balcony overlooking the alley and the dumpster and talked about what it would actually mean to move forward, not just emotionally, but physically. She joked that I should buy a beach house and post photos like the influencers do, caption something cryptic like, "Healing in silence hits different." We laughed, but the seed was planted. I had money, more than they knew. I had clients in multiple states, and a savings account I never talked about because honestly, bragging felt gross, and I knew it would just fuel the comparisons. but the idea of creating a life they couldn't ignore, one that didn't include begging them to see me, but forced them to wonder how they missed so much, that idea had teeth. 3 days later, I started looking at properties. Not seriously at first, just scrolling, bookmarking, imagining, but then I found one. A modest 2-bedroom beachfront villa just outside Santa Cruz, painted in soft coastal grays with big windows and a wraparound deck facing the ocean. It wasn't massive, it wasn't flashy, but it looked like freedom. I didn't tell anyone, not Maria, not my boss, certainly not my parents. I booked a flight quietly. The day I left, I got a group text from my mom about some distant cousin's baby shower, and without even thinking, I replied, "Can't make it, taking a little trip." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just 6 words that would end up mattering more than I realized. Because silence might not be strength on its own, but when you pair it with action, the kind that speaks louder than any confrontation ever could, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes power. It wasn't revenge I wanted, not really, not in the cartoon villain sense with elaborate plans and maniacal laughter. It was recognition, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, but simply demands to be seen, to exist in someone's field of vision with the same weight, the same presence, that for years had only ever been reserved for my brother. That morning, still sipping coffee from the same chipped mug I'd had since grad school, I opened my laptop and stared at the photos of the beachside villa again. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to memorize every corner, every detail, to feel like it was mine, even before the paperwork was signed. The light coming through the wide glass doors looked almost unreal, like a postcard you'd expect to find in a tourist-trap gift shop. Only better because it didn't belong to just anyone. It was going to belong to me. Maria, ever the skeptic and ever the ride-or-die friend, didn't immediately celebrate the idea when I finally told her. Instead, she leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, head tilted in that specific way she does when she's both worried and impressed. "Are you sure you're not doing this out of spite?" she asked, not accusingly but with genuine concern. The kind that only comes from someone who's seen you at your absolute worst and still shows up anyway. I appreciated the question, not because it made me second-guess myself, but because it gave me the chance to say, for the first time out loud, "No, I'm not doing it out of spite. I'm doing it because I finally want to live somewhere that doesn't smell like compromise." There's something liberating about making a decision that doesn't require approval or applause. Something almost rebellious about creating a life that doesn't revolve around explaining your choices to people who've never truly listened in the first place. I put in an offer on the villa that afternoon, and within 48 hours, it was mine. No counter, no drama, just a wire transfer and a real estate agent who couldn't stop calling me Ms. Pierce, like I was someone important. And for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I felt like I was. I didn't announce it. I didn't post a big news status or send a group text with champagne emojis and excessive exclamation points. Instead, I did what I always did when something mattered. I kept it to myself, like a secret flame, something small but powerful that I could protect until it was ready to burn in full view. In the meantime, I started dropping hints, subtle ones like posting stories from vaguely coastal coffee shops, sharing sunrise snapshots that gave away just enough horizon to make people wonder, but not enough to confirm anything. The comments started rolling in. "Vacation. Where is this? OMG, jealous." But I never responded. Not yet. My parents called once that week. Just to check in, if you could call it that. My mother's voice was light, casual, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't let my birthday slide past without a flicker of acknowledgement. She talked about Alex's plans, some new training program he was joining at work. How proud they were that he was really settling into leadership. I nodded along, let her fill the space with praise I'd long stopped expecting for myself. And when she finally asked what I'd been up to, I simply said, "Oh, working, thinking, making some changes." She didn't press, she never did. Alex hadn't called me in months, not since the boat party. He'd texted a generic "hope you're well" once in April, and I'd replied with a thumbs up, which, in our family, was basically code for "we're done here." He didn't push either, probably too busy basking in the comfort of being adored without effort. But I was okay with that. In fact, I preferred it that way. With the villa secured, the plan became more about timing than anything else. I wasn't looking to make a splash, at least not right away. What I wanted was precision, a reveal so calm, so offhanded, that it would echo louder than any rant or confrontation ever could. I wasn't going to say I'd been forgotten. I wasn't going to call them out. I was going to let the silence speak for me, backed by ocean breeze and golden hour lighting. Moving day came quicker than expected. I packed light, just clothes, essentials, and a few framed photos of people who made me feel like someone, most of them not related to me by blood. As I locked up my old apartment for the last time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I'd spent years quietly building while pretending I didn't mind being passed over. The villa was even more beautiful in person. The air smelled different, cleaner, touched with salt and space and the faintest trace of eucalyptus. I stood barefoot on the deck that first evening, watching the sky turn from gold to lavender, and I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my own voice just to keep the peace. Not anymore. Maria sent a text that night. Settled in? I sent back a photo of the sunset and typed 3 words that said everything I felt. Finally, truly, fully. Just getting started. The sky looked like it had been painted by someone who had never seen a sunset before, but was determined to capture every color they could imagine, from blood orange to bruised plum, and yet, as I stood on the deck of my villa, with the wind tugging softly at my hair, and the sound of the ocean folding in and out like some ancient secret, I didn't think about the view or the temperature or even the way the horizon seemed to stretch out forever. I thought about timing and how strange it was that something so ordinary, so forgettable in most people's daily lives, could be the most powerful tool I had left. I had spent years giving pieces of myself away, quietly, without protest, like it was normal to be overlooked, like it was a skill to not need anything in return. But standing there, phone in hand, camera open, heart steady, I finally understood the weight of not saying something, not out of fear or pain, but because the silence itself had become its own language, sharp and surgical. I took the photo just after 6 in the evening, the light hitting just right, casting a golden filter across my skin that didn't need any digital enhancement. I didn't force the smile. It came naturally, not because I was happy in that moment, but because I was free. And sometimes freedom wears the same face as joy, even if the feelings underneath are more complicated than that. The ocean behind me stretched wide and endless, the kind of background people assume is a stock image unless you're the type of person who already lives a life worthy of those views. But this time, I was that person. I captioned it simply: forgotten birthdays and half-truths, but you can't forget someone living her dream. And then I hit post. It didn't take long. At first, just a few likes trickled in. Co-workers, old college friends, a woman I hadn't spoken to since a yoga retreat 3 years ago. But then the comments started piling up, one after another, like dominoes tipped in motion by that one sentence, that one photo, that one moment of quiet, calculated exposure. People weren't just reacting to the image. They were reacting to the tone, to the statement buried beneath the words, the implication that something had been broken, and that instead of trying to fix it, I'd left the pieces on the floor and built something new entirely. Damn, this caption hits. This is the kind of energy we need more of. You okay? This feels personal. Tell us everything. And still, I didn't say a word. It took less than 24 hours for it to reach the people I'd really intended it for, though I would never admit it out loud, because when I woke up the next morning, my phone was lit up like a Christmas tree with missed calls, unread messages, and one voicemail from a number I knew too well. Hey, sweetheart, it's your mom. We saw your post. Are you okay? Where are you? Why didn't you tell us you moved? Your father's worried. Alex is confused. Just call us, okay? Please? Her voice cracked on that last word, and part of me, some sliver I hadn't fully killed off yet, felt that old pull, that urge to smooth it over, to explain myself, to wrap it all up in something easy and palatable for them to digest. But I didn't return the call. I didn't send a text. I didn't reply to Alex's comment on the post. Congrats, I guess. Didn't know you were moving. Or to the flood of DMs that started circling like sharks who smelled drama in the digital water. Because I knew what would happen if I did. I knew that if I answered, I'd be pulled back into the same cycle of pretending it didn't matter, of minimizing my own hurt for the sake of keeping the peace, of accepting crumbs and calling it a meal. I wasn't interested in explanations anymore. I was interested in space. And space, I learned, isn't always something you ask for. Sometimes you just take it. Maria called that evening, her voice practically vibrating through the line. Girl, what did you do? My cousin just sent me your post like it's some kind of mystery to solve. People are talking. I laughed, not out of cruelty, but because it was absurd how fast the narrative had shifted. How quickly people cared once they realized I wasn't in the background anymore. I didn't do anything, I said. I just told the truth, quietly. She was quiet for a beat, then said, honestly, it's kind of genius. You didn't name names, you didn't rant, you just lived. And now they're all scrambling to fill in the blanks. That was the part that mattered most to me. That I hadn't needed to rage, hadn't needed to beg or accuse or point fingers. I had simply shown them what life looked like, without them in the center of it. And the vacuum it created was louder than anything I could have shouted. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned that deep indigo that only the Pacific can pull off, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine and watched the world go quiet again. The comment count kept rising, the messages kept piling in, but I didn't open them. I didn't need to, because I had already said everything I needed to say, without ever raising my voice. The voicemail from my mother lingered in my notifications for the better part of a day, untouched and unopened. Not because I hadn't seen it, but because I knew exactly what would be waiting inside. The same fragile tone she used when things slipped beyond her control. That tentative, almost performative quiver in her voice that said she wanted resolution. But on her terms. The kind where the facts were massaged and the past was reinterpreted until my feelings became overreactions and her omissions became understandable mistakes. But this time, I let it sit, unread and unanswered, like a tiny monument to the years I'd spent chasing her approval with the kind of quiet desperation that made me excellent at my job, but emotionally invisible at home. I made breakfast instead. I folded laundry. I walked barefoot along the shoreline until my calves ached and my cheeks burned from the sun. I let the sound of the waves dull the noise in my head and reminded myself that silence, when chosen, is not weakness, it's strategy. The comment section on my post had reached a fever pitch. By the third day, I'd lost count of the messages. Some from acquaintances who acted like they'd known all along that I was destined for something better. Others from people who had never so much as liked a single photo of mine before, but now wanted to dissect every detail of my so-called glow-up like I was a character in some televised family drama. But nestled between the performative cheerleading and the speculation were the comments that hit deepest. Messages from strangers, mostly women, saying they had lived it too, that they had been the overlooked daughter, the quiet sibling, the one who did everything right and still ended up watching someone else get credit for simply existing. They weren't looking for pity. They were looking for permission to be angry, to be seen, to stop apologizing for noticing the imbalance they'd been trained to accept. I didn't respond to most of them, but I read every single one. The phone rang again late that evening. This time it was Alex. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. He didn't leave a voicemail, just a text afterward that said, "We should talk. It's getting weird." That was the thing with Alex. He never saw the layers. He didn't see the years that led to this moment. He just saw the headline, Sister moves, goes viral, family confused. He had spent a lifetime being the favored child, not out of malice, but because he fit so neatly into the box our parents had built for success. He followed the rules they valued, pursued the path they understood, and in doing so, he became the standard by which I was measured and found lacking. I didn't hate him for it. I envied how easy it must have been to be adored for simply showing up. But now things weren't so simple. Now I was the one with the view, with the story, with the upper hand, and he was the one asking for clarity. I didn't give it to him. Instead, I poured myself a drink and stepped outside just as the sky began to shift from the burnt hues of dusk into the deep, shadowed blues of early night. The ocean was restless, louder than usual, as if it too sensed the tension rippling through the air. I stared out into the distance, letting the salt wind press against my skin like a baptism, a washing away of all the years I had wasted trying to be palatable, acceptable, forgettable for the sake of familial comfort. And then I posted again, this time no photo, no dramatic reveal, just a single sentence in a blank black story background. Growth isn't revenge, it's truth. The reactions came slower this time, more subdued, more contemplative, fewer applause emojis, more quiet affirmations. A few people unfollowed me. A couple reached out in private, asking what I meant, what happened, if I was okay. I ignored most of it, not because I didn't appreciate the concern, but because I no longer felt the need to explain myself to people who only started listening when my pain became aesthetically pleasing. The silence from my parents, however, was almost deafening. After that initial message, they went quiet. I imagined they were regrouping, trying to rewrite the narrative in a way that made sense to them. Maybe convincing themselves that I was going through something, that this was just a phase, that I'd come back around once the novelty of the ocean wore off. But I knew better. I wasn't coming back. Not to the version of me that needed their validation like oxygen. In the days that followed, I built a routine. I woke early, watched the sun rise from the deck, and let the light stretch across the hardwood floors like a quiet promise. I worked, I walked, I breathed. I didn't cry, not once, not even when I played the voicemail and heard the tremble in my mother's voice. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I cared enough to protect what I had finally built. My peace was no longer on the bargaining table. And still, even with the clarity and the calm, there were questions that lingered like smoke after a fire. Would they change? Would they finally understand? Would I ever let them back in? I didn't know. I wasn't interested in closure anymore. I had learned that some doors don't need to be slammed shut or left wide open. Some just quietly lock themselves behind you while you keep walking. As the last light slipped below the horizon, I turned off my phone, placed it face down on the counter, and stood at the edge of the deck, staring out at the vast, quiet water, where in the distance, a ship's horn echoed once, long and low, before vanishing into the wind. And in that moment, with no audience and no applause, I smiled, not because they had finally noticed me, but because I no longer needed them to.